Fuck it, let's go live. Welcome to SecularTv's Thursday edition of Reason Speak. With me today is Dustin Arand, the author of a new book. We'll get to him in just a moment. Why don't you wave to everybody, Dustin?
Hey, everybody.
Hi, everybody. All right. But before we get to Dustin, I just want to do something to clear this silly barrier to my face. There we go. Welcome to Secular TV. Oh, now I'm Thursday edition of Reason Speak. Okay, there we go. Now, what I got to do is get my headphones going. But before while I do that, I want to get the housekeeping out of the way first, and let everybody know exactly what they're doing here, and you'll have to excuse me, but I have a slow computer. Thank you. I want to talk a little bit about SecularTv itself. It won't take me long, a couple of minutes. I just want to tell you what our goals are. And the goal of SecularTv is to help promote unique and interesting content while focusing on a variety of diverse ideas that appeal to various groups in the secular community. In short, our goal is to provide a springboard for producers, assisting in the production of quality secular shows without dictating or censoring content. Having said that, I'm very proud to present to you Dustin Arand from the DC area of the United States. Good afternoon, Dustin.
Good afternoon.
How are you doing today?
Very well, thank you.
You all ready to talk for an hour?
Yes, thank you for having me on.
Oh no, I'm honored because I love having new ideas presented that I haven't heard before, and I like to share them with everybody else to listen to as well. So, first off, tell me about the young Dustin Arand as a young kid before you left high school.
Sure. So I was raised Catholic and went to Catholic grade school and high school. I was really interested in, like a lot of kids, dinosaurs and animals and of course science. Digging in my backyard. I lived out in the country, so I had plenty of opportunities to walk in the woods, dig in the dirt, explore, and I think once I got around to junior high, high school, and started getting exposed to the idea of evolution, it really just hit home with me. All of my experiences, learning about different kinds of animals and dinosaurs and whatnot, and of course the books I had read as a child discussed evolution in that context, right? So I was ready for it, and it really just, it's like Daniel Dennett said, it's just this idea that once you understand it, you can't see the world any other way. It's like a universal acid, dissolves everything. And so I kind of got this sense that, that the religion that we were being taught just couldn't account for the world as I had been coming to understand it. In fact, I began to see religion itself as a human artifact, as a product of human evolution, both our biological evolution and our cultural evolution, and that view would really inform a lot of my future kind of intellectual pursuits. It would motivate a lot of them. So yeah, I probably became an atheist, I guess, end of high school, beginning of college.
Okay, so when you went to college, did you pursue your studies with a view to uncovering more about your little philosophy that that you came up with?
Well, initially I was an anthropology major, but I also was just really dead set on traveling a lot, and so I did a study abroad in China, and during that course of that year, I kind of felt like, rather than digging up the past, I was much more interested in the political scene in the world today. And so I came back to America after a year there, and I switched over to international studies, which is like poli-sci, foreign languages. I should mention that I'm always interested in learning language too. That was something ever since I guess junior high and high school. So I studied Chinese in China, and I've studied French in France, and so that love of languages also played a big part in the kinds of philosophy of language and linguistics and communications theory books that I like to read, and that played a big role in the content of this book.
So
yeah,
the book itself is called
Truth Evolves.
Truth Evolves, correct. And is there like a subtitle to it? Truth Evolves?
No, I thought that was elegant enough.
No, I love that. I love actually. I read your little summary, and I really love the idea behind it. So perhaps you want to break it down a little bit slowly for our audience and kind of ease them in gently.
Okay.
And, yeah.
Well, you know, because I've had a lot of misunderstandings about what I mean here. People would say, "Well, come on now, you know, certain things are just facts, and like 2 + 2 always equals 4." And it's like, I'm not saying that, you know, the reality of the world changes, like, you know, the laws of physics change, but our way of describing them changes because our knowledge gets better. So the basic thesis of the book is that knowledge is a kind of adaptation. So again, just like any adaptation, it has been selected for its fit to certain problems.
Yeah.
So certain selective pressures are molding it in a certain way. Truth then becomes a measure of the degree of fitness of an idea in its proper context, in its environmental context. But that means there's no such thing as truth or knowledge outside of any context at all. There has to be some kind of context, which is another way of saying there's always a theory. You're always viewing the world from some theoretical vantage.
Yes.
There's no such thing as, you know, a God's eye view of the world.
Correct.
You have to come to your perception and your understanding with some kind of way of selectively emphasizing certain features of the environment that you're paying attention to and ignoring others. So with that in mind, and I spent a lot of time in the first chapter of the book summarizing a lot of ideas of 20th century philosophers like Popper and Wittgenstein and Quine, who were very concerned with how does meaning arise in language, because clearly all of our truths are embodied in this medium of language. That's how we can convey them. But how do these words acquire meaning? The common sense kind of notion is that, well, a word means what it means because there's some category of objects and they have something in common, and that's what the word means. That's what the word refers to. It's that whatever that essence is of the things that they. And you know,
what you're saying is there's a derivative. A word just doesn't appear out of nowhere for no reason.
Well, I'm saying I disagree with that view. I'm disagreeing with the view that words have meaning because they pick out some kind of essential property. Instead, I'm saying words are tools, and there's a kind of collective pressure exerted by the society on each individual member to conform their usage of words to the collective understanding of what that is, you know, to the generally accepted understanding of what that is. But that can always change. Just as we're seeing right now in the United States, the meaning of the word marriage is changing, has been changing. And in fact, I argue in the book, the chapter where I talk about political philosophy and legal interpretation, that we're only having this discussion about marriage equality now because the meaning of marriage wasn't static, that it had been changing long before the 20th century. So that's kind of the main thrust of the book. The ideas change with time as environmental pressures are brought to bear on them. And all truth, all knowledge is a matter of getting into better relations with those parts of the environment that are important to us. those problems that we're trying to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
So there's never an endpoint, right, to this process.
Right.
Just like evolution doesn't have an endpoint.
Correct.
So there's never going to be like an ultimate truth. If you're on a quest for certainty, you're not going to get there. But then the really interesting question for me is, well, still, how do you avoid the pitfalls along the way, right? You know, how can you facilitate that process of trial and error, of getting your ideas, you know, closer and closer to what you need them to be to solve your problems?
So how if we can dream a bit and hypothesize a bit, if we had the if everybody in the world has just read your book, and now everybody's got that knowledge, they've read your book, and they're now, I'm assuming they're now going to balance your philosophy versus their own dogmatic whatever philosophy they have ingrained in them without thinking. And they've got to start, if they read your book, they're going to have to think about it, because it's a thinking book. It's a book that when you read it, it gets you thinking. What kind of a change would you like to see happen in the world as a result of your book?
I would like to see a great deal more humility, in the sense of, you know, I think one of the huge problems we have right now, when you look around, not just, you know, the extreme example being something like ISIS over in the Middle East, but here even in North America, we have conservative Christians in politics who are trying to legislate basically certain articles of faith that not everyone shares, despite the fact that we are a pluralistic society. And I don't think that people would do that if they had what I think is they had more perspective. They had a more humble epistemic outlook on the world. You know, if they went into it knowing, yeah, I don't know the truth with a capital T, and I never will, but I want to try to understand the world better, and I want to understand other people better. So how can I do that?
Right. The way I look at it, I don't think there is such a thing as a truth. I mean, when the word truth is thrown about, you know, truth, it makes it kind of loses all meaning to me. I don't know what exactly they mean by finding truth.
Things in different contexts, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like there's no one truth. I mean, it just makes no sense. The word, you know, they've got all these fancy little word and the lamb and the alpha and all this nonsense that's supposed to, you know, impart some kind of Gnostic meaning to, or Gnostic understanding that of the existence of this non-existent deity.
As I argue in the book, you know, it's not just those categories for material things like, you know, species of animal that lead us astray in terms of, you know, falling for the idea that they're characterized by a common essence. It's also words for abstract concepts like truth or good or evil. These words can be used with slightly different senses in different types of contexts. And to think that there is an essence of truth, there's some one quality that every truth statement has that makes it true, is, I think, to confuse the way we use the word truth as a tool in various modes of discourse. So, for example, if we're talking about morality, the concept of truth is, I think, necessarily more elastic than if we're talking about physics. And the reason is that the laws of physics are what they are, completely independent of human beings, of our evolutionary history, of our culture, right? Whereas if we're talking about morality, we're talking about certain inborn predispositions, we're talking about certain cultural values, and these are more amorphous, you know, moving targets.
Yeah.
You're obviously not going to be able to identify truths in one category that are as clear and precise as you might be able to in another, in the other category. You see what I'm saying? Like there's obviously some room for disagreement with respect to some moral questions, whereas you wouldn't maybe find as much room for disagreement on some maybe physical science questions.
Yeah, I have a little problem with the word moral and morality. I don't see how it applies in the real world. I prefer to use ethics and common sense.
Well, I use when I think of morality, I'm thinking more like I should say probably not like most individuals who, when I grew up, morality was like those rules that God laid down, right, that you have to follow.
That's right.
But now when I say morality, what I'm thinking of is certain evolved inborn dispositions to judge certain interactions favorably or unfavorably, and to want to reward or punish certain kinds of behavior based on their consequences for social cooperation. So in other words, as a social species, we have evolved certain predispositions that help us maintain cooperative relationships with others, and that suite of expectations and dispositions, that's all taken together. You know, it's a very amorphous, fluid concept, but you know, if you could find the center of gravity of that concept, that's what I mean by morality. By ethics, I mean something slightly different. For me, ethical questions are more like individual questions, like, you know, how do I find meaning and purpose in life? How should I conduct myself? But you know, morals and ethics, I think the problem for a lot of folks is that they grew up learning that morality basically referred only to like sexual morality in a very, you know, oppressive environment, and that's not the sense that I'm using it in.
So you're saying that morality has one meaning and ethics has a different meaning?
Well, I'm saying I use them slightly differently.
Okay. Well, so morality, how does that? How do you use morality in a secular sense?
What I mean by then, like I just said, is a certain set of expectations about how people ought to act in order to maintain the cooperative environment. And these can include things like an expectation of being treated fairly, an expectation that people won't harm people without good reason, like you know, you won't cause someone else harm unless you're trying to defend yourself or defend someone else from harm. These are basic like things that are universal. That you respect someone else. You don't just take something from someone without asking. You know, I think H.L.A. Hart said that if you came across just a group of people who had no rules at all about doing violence to one another or to their property, whatever you could call them, it wouldn't be a society. Because no matter where you find people, you find these basic rules. So that transcends religion. You don't need religion for that. I think that's an instinct. I think.
Right.
In the book, I discuss some experiments with other animals, other primates, where they find similar traits: capacity for empathy, a sense of fairness and indignation when one is treated unfairly. So these are ancient predispositions that probably we shared with our common ancestors. Oh, pardon me, 1 second.
Okay, I was also just thinking back to ancient history. You know, back to if you go all the way back to the Sumerian civilization, even they had, you know, justice. They had laws.
You know, what I'm saying is, even in prehistory, even before we were human, we had certain expectations of how one ought to conduct oneself.
Right, absolutely.
Religion has co-opted them and attempted to make them their own and say that they actually come from religion, but that's, you know, religion is a kind of Johnny-come-lately on the scene.
Religion is so stupid. I was listening to a podcast yesterday about early, what was it, in the 800s, in the year, sorry, in the 800 AD area, 800 CE, and they were talking about different popes that had, you know, up to that point, and there were stories of popes, you know, married and and having children out of wedlock, and not doing things that the way the Pope today does it.
Mhm.
But that just tells me that whatever we've evolved in whatever the Catholic religion specifically has evolved to today is not divine at all. It's just they've just gone and
I
screwed
think
things up.
one thing that might explain those phenomena is that you had terrible inequality throughout the Middle Ages. And
Yes.
one of the things we've seen is that in highly unequal societies, that almost instinctive sense of morals can break down, and the people at the very top can feel almost entitled to all kinds of privileges, and really devalue, dehumanize individuals who rank below them on the social ladder. So this is important because when I say morality is a set of instinctive predispositions, there's still a lot of range for different manifestations of those predispositions. If the environmental context is rather warped, as it is in highly unequal societies, I think that can warp one's conscience, one's sense of right and wrong. And you can see the kind of behaviors that you were talking about, but I think you also see it today. A guy like Donald Trump, or some of the people in the 1% who seem to actually, I think there was a study done that showed that they were more likely to cheat on certain tasks when given a certain task by a researcher, or like to have an overinflated sense of one's self-worth, feel entitled, things like that. And like when you warp the kinds of conditions under which our moral instincts developed, which was a much more egalitarian type of society, I think it does have negative consequences for our ability to continue to see one another as equals, as persons that we have to respect. Which is why it's so easy to dehumanize the poor in America as we do.
Yeah.
But again, that's actually something that I mentioned in the book in terms of my political philosophy, because I view knowledge as a process, an evolutionary process. It's better for facilitating that process if it's participatory and open, right, and transparent and accountable. So I'm naturally drawn towards democracy, but not just saying democracy doesn't really mean much. You have to specify what you're really talking about there. What we really need are institutions, political and economic institutions, that encourage and that empower individuals to participate in them. And I don't think we do that enough yet. And I argue it in the book against this idea of negative liberty, because I feel like it doesn't address the need to provide access to the institutions that wield power, to the people who are because you're not going to have a process that is as corrigible, as capable of self-correction as it could be if you were leaving out huge swaths of the population, if you're ignoring their voices, if you're not giving them the tools they need to inform themselves and add their voice to the discussion.
How much of your original thinking has actually been exposed to the general public? How much have you got out there?
Well, before writing this book, I was a regular contributor to a number of groups on Facebook, and a lot of the ideas, I kind of test drove them there to see how they would work out, and I was able to kind of refine them a bit. But yeah, I think most of the ideas got out there in some form or the other, but there's still some interesting stuff there. I mean, I think I never really put it all together in one place before.
Oh, and okay, is this a definitive work, or do you?
Well, no, I think the title would be a misnomer if I thought that was the end of it, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. That's my question. Like when you say you have a second printing or
I'd
whatever.
say this is where I am right now, right?
Yeah, I understand. No, that's awesome. So, how would you teach this in the schools, or would it be taught in the schools?
Um, I don't. Well, I think actually one thing that I had considered. I'm a lawyer by training,
Hmm.
but I've been a stay-at-home dad for the last few years since my sons were born. And I thought about, when they got older, returning to the workforce and maybe trying to get a teacher certification. Um, I'd love to teach the American Constitution to kids. I feel like that understanding the Constitution and the law is really important. Not enough high schoolers really understand it. But also philosophy. I think because I think they go together because they both require us to think about how we go from particular instances that we observe and defining certain laws that govern those instances. Generalizations that encapsulate what we've seen, what the data tell us, right? And testing
Hmm.
those generalizations. That's really what the law is. The law is a series of consolidations of experience um, and revisions of those consolidations to improve their performance. Um, but that's really all any knowledge is. I think words, theories, ideas, they're all consolidations of experience. You can use them as tools to make predictions, but by definition, they are predicting events that have not yet been incorporated into those words or those ideas, right? So
Hmm.
there's necessarily going to be a disconnect between the way you conceive the world and the way you make predictions about it and what's actually going to happen. Um, the hubris, I think, of many people who think um, that like the Platonic ideals are metaphysically real things, or possibly religion says something similar, that there are these clear, immutable, objective truths. The problem for people like that is that they're never going to be able to have their ideas participate in that iterative process whereby
Hmm.
they can render them closer and closer to reality.
Hmm.
They're not able to test their ideas because their ideas are not testable in most cases. If you assume that something is that God, for example, um, is a being that transcends all experience, right? There's no amount of experience that could possibly alter the reality of God or change your ideas about it. Then there's no way you can refine that concept, right? And
Uh-huh.
anything that follows from that concept, there's no way that you can refine that.
There is a question that before the internet has posed. What does Dustin think about transhumanism?
I'm not really familiar with. Is this now
I
my
don't know what it is myself, to be honest
my?
with you.
And hopefully your viewers can help clarify. But like my understanding is that this refers to some state in the near future when we'll be able to maybe like upload our consciousness into machines or make do without our bodies or something like that. I'm not really sure, or maybe that's the singularity.
Okay, well, if that is what it is, it sounds pretty sketchy.
Yeah, I'm not really sure because I think I don't know that your one's consciousness is a discrete thing. You know what I mean? I think when we talk about
Mm.
consciousness, what we're really talking about is a whole bunch of different things going on, and
Right.
I don't think you could pin it down, right? And so I don't know exactly what you would
Well, yeah,
upload.
is that like saying when you talk about a house, you're talking about a whole bunch of screws and drywall and paint
Right?
and wood and shingles and blah blah blah, all this and plumbing and all the stuff that goes into it?
Yeah, I mean, and that's again, we're used to using words like I or me or consciousness or self or person um, as if they were these logically discrete entities because we need to use them that way to play the language game of assigning responsibility or assigning qualities. But I think those concepts break down when you really try to unpack them. And I think that was the heart of Wittgenstein's philosophy, what he was trying to say.
Right.
But I hope, I don't know, I probably haven't really answered the question about transhumanism. It's something I need to learn more about. But
yeah, he hasn't elaborated on it, so we'll have to move on to something else and forget about transhumanism, which is something I don't know what it is either. I don't think I've even heard the word before. Transhumanism kind of sounds a little strange. You're a lawyer.
Yeah.
Yeah. How long did you work as a lawyer before you said kids come first?
Not long. I graduated in 2008, and I had a clerkship for 2 years, which actually was really very enjoyable. Did a lot of research and writing. And then I moved down here to DC with my wife after she graduated from law school. And I was, working as a contract attorney, but once the kids came along, I just felt like it isn't just that it's really, really expensive to find childcare for 2 kids, but the sacrifice of quality of life, not getting to see your kids, and especially my wife works very long hours because she works for a large law firm. So we both felt that we wanted the kids to have one parent, with them, and it made more sense because,
How did the freedom given to you by not having to go to work every day contribute to the book?
Well, actually, it was nice. Although, I've been stay-at-home dad now for 3 years, and it took me all that time to finish the book because I didn't have a whole lot of free time, and I had to read a tremendous amount to do the research for this book. But I was really inspired by my kids to start work on this. That was the impetus.
A question.
Because I really felt like I wanted to give them, something that says, this is what I believe. It started out as an essay about religion, what my thoughts about that were. Because I remember feeling when I was a kid that it was something that's hard to talk about. A lot of people didn't want to talk about it, didn't want to ask questions. And I knew that, my kids are going to be as inquisitive as I was. That I wanted them to have me give them an answer that respected their intelligence, and that you don't have to agree with me, but I wanted them to say, that's fair. You've explained your position, given reasons for it.
Yeah.
So I started writing that. It was just an essay, a 10,000 word essay, but I found as I was writing it, there were a lot of issues that were kind of tangential to the main thrust of that essay that I felt merited being fleshed out more. So I started writing that, and before I knew it, I had enough material to make a whole book. And so I reorganized it, rewrote it, and finally we have this finished product.
Nice. How many pages is the book? What give me an idea.
The paperback is about 250 pages.
Okay, so how do people source your book?
How do they see it?
How do they source it? How do they get it? How do they get hold of it?
Yeah, it's on Amazon.com, and in fact, it's on Kindle as well. And I'm going to be doing a free promotion starting next week. So the 20th, the 21st, and the 22nd. Those 3 days, you'll be able to download it for free if you have a Kindle.
Okay. Once we're done here, make sure that you give me the links, and I'll add them onto the
Google
no problem. YouTube page for for anybody who watches later. Do you find yourself in a situation where you're the only one who thinks the way you think with your philosophy, or is there a group of people that you kind of conspire with, or have a similar approach with?
Well, I don't know anyone who like would say they agree with me on 100% of the things, you know what I mean, that I would say.
But no, on this particular topic, on this
Um,
particular philosophy. Also, before you carry on, there's a question.
mhm.
What philosophers do you like the most?
Oh, okay.
Maybe that'll help.
Well, the philosophers that had the biggest influence on me in terms of this book were John Dewey, um, Ludwig Wittgenstein, Karl Popper, W.V.O. Quine, Nelson Goodman, Daniel Sperber, and Deirdre Wilson. Um, I'm probably forgetting some. Thomas Kuhn, definitely. Henry Plotkin and Arthur Kessler. Those are names you probably don't hear a whole lot, but especially Arthur Kessler.
Arthur Kessler or Arthur Koestler?
Arthur Kessler.
Oh, okay. No,
yeah, his book, The Act of Creation, was a major influence on my thinking. And Henry Plotkin, his book, Darwin Machines and the Nature of Knowledge, he's the one who has the idea of knowledge as a form of adaptation. And I was really kind of trying to synthesize his ideas with a number of other philosophers of language and science, and then to draw implications from that synthesis for other areas of philosophy like ethics and morality and politics.
Right.
Yeah, I highly recommend Plotkin. Highly recommend Kessler, Kuhn, Wittgenstein, Dewey.
I have an image in my head of evolution being something slow moving. With your philosophy and the evolution of information, I guess, is time a factor at all or not?
I think it is a factor because evolution has to work with what it has to work with. But I think with ideas, you can see more radical jumps than you might see with genes, or at least the radical jumps might more often lead to good ideas than they would with genes, where a radical kind of mutation would be much more likely to be deleterious than to be beneficial.
Yeah.
But like one of the ideas that I talk about is this idea of Arthur Kessler's. He discusses this concept called bisociation, and well, he illustrates it with the story of Archimedes, which is probably apocryphal, but a lot of people heard it. Archimedes was tasked with discovering whether this crown that was supposedly made of gold was really made of gold. So he needed to test its volume, I guess, how much, whether it had the same volume of gold. Because if it was a baser metal, it would not have, I guess, the same weight or whatever.
Purity of gold or whatever inside it?
Yeah.
Okay.
The king of Syracuse thought that the goldsmith was cheating him. So anyway, so the problem for Archimedes was that he knew how to measure the volume of a regular solid, because he knew the Euclidean formulas for doing that, right? But he didn't know how to measure a volume for an irregular solid. So the story is that one day he's getting into the bathtub and he sees the water level rise, and he's like, "Eureka! I can put it in the water and see how much water it displaces." Right.
Right.
And Kessler kind of picks this story apart, and he says the key to insight, and not just in this story but in any story, is that you have two different and normally non-intersecting modes of thinking or acting, right? And then all of a sudden, by chance, by happenstance, by serendipity, they're brought together, and they're fused in a way that allows a novel inference to be drawn from this bisociation, this bisection of these different matrices of thought. So Archimedes was very knowledgeable about mathematics, geometry, right? Now he had all that knowledge in his head, and he's sitting into the bathtub one day, and he's been mulling over this problem for a long time, and so it's there kind of on the back burner, and all of a sudden the idea that he must have entertained before, that you have to take into account the fact that you displace water so you don't overfill your tub, suddenly it clicked with him. Yeah. That you could combine these two matrices of thought and get a new inference that wasn't available before. And so that's an example of how creativity can make a kind of a jump, a leap that isn't there. Nothing in Archimedes' knowledge prior to that moment would allow him to logically deduce the solution to his problem. It was only once he combined those different fields of knowledge he was able to draw that deduction. Right? And so that's a way that we have of gaining knowledge that may not be, I don't know if that's available to the biological process of evolution in the same way.
Right. I'm just wondering, you know, the more I think about it, it's kind of dawning on me that this is another branch of philosophy that you've come up with. It could be taught as a philosophy.
And how's that? I mean, I see it more as like...
I just don't see it anywhere. I don't see your way of thinking or your theories, your philosophy being taught or being shared by anybody else.
I think it's, you know, I think John Dewey talked a lot about knowledge as a tool rather than as a kind of abstract thing that was independent of human existence. And Karl Popper talked about induction as an evolutionary process. You know, my goal really here, I really saw myself as someone who is trying to synthesize a lot of ideas from people in philosophy, in cognitive science, in artificial intelligence, and other fields, in political philosophy, and try to show how, you know, this underlying concept, which is very important in the book, which is what I call corrigibility, which is like the capacity to correct oneself, right? That this underlying concept and the values that are necessary to really facilitate that process, they are applicable not just in the realm of knowledge. You know, they're not just valuable for scientists, although the scientific community, I think, most clearly embodies those values, but they're also applicable in moral philosophy, in politics, and economics, and other areas. And so that's, I think, another thing that I would want readers to take away from that is to think about knowledge as a process. It's not a destination. It's a work in progress, you know, and it's something that is necessarily communal. In the sense that you sitting alone by yourself thinking about things are never going to arrive at better knowledge than you would if you had a bunch of people working together to solve a problem, bouncing ideas off of each other.
Wouldn't it make more sense to go worldwide into any hotel room, and instead of opening the side drawer, you see a Gideon's Bible, you open up the side door and you see see your book? Doesn't that make more sense? Wouldn't that make the world a better place by just...
Well, there's probably a lot of other books that would make more sense than my book to be there, but...
Well, that makes more sense than the Gideon Bible.
Okay.
That's for sure.
Yeah, no, actually, although I was raised Catholic, I read a lot of the Bible, but I hadn't read all of it until last year. I just decided as a project that I was going to read all of it and see what I could find in it. It was, you know, if it had any redeeming qualities. And I was really disappointed. I was hoping to find something that would be like, oh, here, I can engage with this, you know, intellectually.
Right. Yeah, I've tried that. It's a hopeless cause.
Well, I came away with the feeling that, you know, you obviously can't take this book literally. And people who do are, I don't know, out of their mind.
They're delusional.
If you take it as allegory, I mean, sure, it has some things to teach, but they're not things that you can't find anywhere else.
Exactly. Yeah, there's nothing divine about this book. It's a book.
Ultimately that was my takeaway. But at least now I can say, well, you know, I gave it a chance.
Right. So how do we get your philosophy, whether by osmosis or whether by something more direct? How do we get the theist, the community of theists to pay attention, to read, to ask questions, to weigh the information you give against the information they sure of, and start breaking down those psychological barriers that prevent people who are just used to being in this religious environment. And
well, one argument that I try to make in the book, and bear in mind, it wasn't my intent in the book to go out and attack religion, but one argument that I do make near the end of the book, when I'm talking about free will and whether that's a possibility at all, and I try to play devil's advocate and make an argument for some kind of free will of some kind. But the only way I could see of making an intelligible argument for it is to say that you have to have it begins with the epistemology that you choose, because from that will follow the beliefs that you act upon. And if you choose an epistemology that is incorrigible, that cannot be corrected because it doesn't participate in that process of trial and error, then to that extent you are not free. You are going to continue following the same beliefs and behaviors that you had before. And it's only if you adopt an epistemology that assumes your knowledge is fallible, that assumes you'll never know for sure, but you need to keep on learning and keep on trying to improve your knowledge. Yeah. That's the only way that you can hope to eliminate the kinds of beliefs that would lead you to behaviors that you wouldn't choose were you aware of the underlying motivations.
Right. So the title of your book is Truth Evolves.
Yeah.
Okay. I want that title to sort of be out there, so people kind of have it on their minds, and they need to look for it. Truth Evolves. Can you, in this instance, at least, sort of take the word truth and give me more of an idea of what do you actually mean by that?
I would say it's a property of descriptions that satisfactorily and reliably accomplish for us what we want them to accomplish.
So it's nothing
so the physicist who needs to launch a rocket, he needs to have equations that tell him how much fuel he needs, how long it's got to burn, to get where it needs to go. He's got to be able, and he needs a mathematical analysis, a system of analysis like a calculus that's going to help him plot a trajectory. Like those, to the extent that those things help him do what he wants to do, then those ideas are true ideas, right? The idea by truth evolves is that sets of ideas cohere together in a theory, and that theory tells us what the individual things in the world are and their logical relationships to one another. But theories can change, and when they do change, there's kind of like a gestalt shift,
right?
Where suddenly, suddenly space and time became space-time, and they weren't these empty things that were separate from other. They were dynamic features of the environment that change and warp. If you go from kind of creationism to evolution, suddenly species are not metaphysically real things. They are convenient designations for certain facts about breeding and heredity and things like that. So when you change your theoretical vantage point, you literally, as Thomas Kuhn said this in his book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, you are living in a different world, because the objects in that world, you could not have deduced their existence from the previous theory that you were looking at. But they are to you no less real now, because that's what you have to work with. Right? You have to slice up the world some way or another. We couldn't have that blooming, buzzing confusion that William James talked about. We have to have some way of looking at the world, some way of slicing it up. And I do think there is a grain to the world, just as there might be a grain to a plank of wood that makes it easier to cut in one way than another.
Correct.
And the question is, what methods can help you find the easier way to cut that grain, to slice up the world in a way that works? And I argue that process is necessarily participatory, requires a lot of minds working together. It's accountable, it's transparent, it seeks out solutions that can be translated into other domains. So, our biological concepts can be understood in terms of chemical concepts, and our chemical concepts can be understood in terms of physical concepts. If we had this idea that there was some area of knowledge that could just be walled off and completely independent of every other area of knowledge, I would find that highly suspect. Almost like we're trying to protect a bad idea from criticism.
So what do you think about the claim that the laws of physics can be suspended by God whenever he wants to do stuff that's unnatural, say?
The funny thing about that is I think it's not consistent with the idea of a God that's omniscient, because presumably such a being could have foreseen any need to intervene and would have designed the laws of physics otherwise, right?
Yeah.
So there wouldn't have been the need to intervene should never arise for an omniscient being and an omnipotent being, because there would be no reason why, if a being is omnipotent, why it couldn't design the world with parameters that fulfill all of its will.
Yeah, and make it absolutely unquestionable that this being does exist and has done what he's
in fact, the need to make a miracle happen would prove the lack of omniscience.
Absolutely, yeah.
I would think, but I think that's just because these words, omniscience and omnipotence, they're kind of nonsensical when you try to make sense of them. And
well, any attribute that you put to God, which is a non-existent,
it's like that old, it's that old saw. Like, could God create a rock so big that he couldn't move it? It's like the problem is with the language, that the terms you're using, they're defined in such a way that they're nonsensical.
Well, it's not so much nonsensical, is that it's an impossibility. Mm-hmm. It's irrational.
It's illogical, though. It's a logical impossibility. It's not
but isn't it illogical? Isn't it illogical? The whole God concept itself is illogical.
Yeah, although I argue in the book that the way our brains are designed by evolution makes supernatural concepts not only intuitively plausible, but in many instances very attractive to us.
Well, it's an explanation within yourself.
There's some interesting research. A little background. In the book, I discuss what I call our intuitive ontology, and you can think of this as certain cognitive tools for dividing up the world into certain categories about which certain kinds of things would be true. For example, persons could have internal mental states, right? You would use theory of mind to infer what their intentions were. Mm-hmm. Tools could be used to accomplish jobs. Animals could be predators or prey. And then physical objects would have certain properties. You throw them, you would have certain intuitions about how hard you need to throw it to make it go a certain distance. All this stuff is basically built in. Mm-hmm. But when you merge those different ontological categories together, that creates, for example, if we like a centaur, right? It's half man, half animal.
Yeah.
Or an angel, a ghost, for example. A ghost has the properties of a person, except that it can pass through walls. It's not alive, right? So it violates certain aspects of our intuitive ontology. And some researchers were scouring, the mythologies and folklores of the world, and they found that you were far more likely to find in human mythologies instances of close ontological categories, that is, ontological categories that share a lot of the same inferences. So, for example, person and animal share a lot of the same inferences because both persons and animals can have desires or fears or other kinds of internal mental states. They're self-motivated, whereas person and tool don't have a lot of overlap, right?
Right.
So you're far more likely to see a mythological creature that's a blend of person and animal than you are of, say, a person and a hammer. And the reason has to do with cultural selection. It's easier to tell a story, and it's easier to remember a story that features characters that have a high degree of inferential potential. That is, you can draw a lot of inferences about what they might do next. You can do a lot of derivative stories of those kinds of stories, you know, where you encourage people to use their imaginations and make new stories based on the centaur. But if you've got a talking hammer, not many people are going to be that interested in it. Not many people are going to make derivative stories of it. You know, it's not going to succeed in cultural evolution, and it's not really well adapted to the environment of the human mind to succeed as in a meme in Dawkins' sense of the word.
Okay, so in Genesis, for example, if the talking snake was actually a talking rock, would that have made like would that have just lost everybody and said, "Oh, this is nonsense"?
Well, I don't even think that would have gotten off the ground.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. I see what you're saying.
Like Project Greenlight were like, no, sorry.
Right. That is very interesting.
I think that goes to show how you can have, you know, a process that nobody's in charge of this process of designing mythologies. They design themselves over time based on people's preferences.
Sure, sure.
And those preferences, there's a logic to them based on how our brains divide up the world and think about the different kinds of objects or events that we encounter, that we have encountered throughout our evolutionary history. So I guess also, if it would one takeaway from people to get from the book is that what you see is not what you get. You're always looking through a lens of some kind and imposing a structure on the world that's not really there in the objective.
Because of the dynamic nature of like everything.
Well, I'm not saying that that, you know, the world is what it is, but anytime you go to make a description of it, that's not what the world. That's your description of the world, you know, and that is subject to change because it's inherently going to be a limited description. It's limited to your own observations or to your culture's observations, your observations that have been built into you by natural selection, you know. Another interesting idea that idea of Plotkin's, Henry Plotkin's that I talk about in the book is that this is really a kind of updating of Kant and the transcendental aesthetic. But you know, Kant imagined that we could have certain knowledge because the transcendental aesthetic gave us kind of access to the mind of God in a way, like, you know, it imposed the same structure on the world that God would see the world with or something, you know, and that was the spark in us that's divine. And I'm saying, no, that transcendental aesthetic has been built slowly into us as human beings by our unique evolutionary trajectory, right? Other organisms would have different ways of slicing up the world based on what has been relevant to them in their own evolutionary history, right? In fact, there's a great passage in Pascal Boyer's book, Religion Explained, when he talks about the difference between the intuitive ontologies of a human being, a dog, and a giraffe, say, where he says, you know, if you had several objects, a lamppost, a tree, a woman, you know, the dog would notice the human being as a human, like as a human being, because dogs and humans have co-evolved, and dogs respond to humans in a certain way that they don't respond to other animals. They almost treat human beings like other cases of dogs in a way. Not always, but they do discriminate humans from other animals. A giraffe wouldn't really notice the difference between a human being and another. And they would be concerned: is this a predator or a prey, or is this a predator? Sorry,
it's moving
predator animal. Whatever. Yeah, they're not going to think about humans the same way. A dog would discriminate between, you know, a lamppost. The dog wouldn't discriminate between the lamppost and the tree, but the human would. The human would see one as a tool and one as a plant. The dog would see them both as ways of marking their territory, possibly. Right. So the way we carve up the world has been honed, you know, over the eons by this process.
Well, how long do you think it's going to take to reverse? If it's taken this long,
To reverse what?
To reverse this toxic thinking of.
I don't think you can purge people of the feeling that say supernatural concepts are intuitively appealing and plausible. I think the best you can hope for is to make people aware of why they find them appealing, and that's a big part of my thesis in the book, especially when I talk near the end about freedom, free will, is that if you don't understand the hold that your implicit notions about the world have on you, then you're never going to escape from them and see the world in a different way. Right?
Correct. Yes. No, absolutely. I agree with you there.
So,
Well, are you versed on other in other areas as well, or do you like to focus mainly on the topic of your book?
well, we can talk about other things.
I don't necessarily mean in this particular interview. You're welcome to come back anytime and carry on.
I mean, like I said, I'm a lawyer by training, so I really enjoy talking about certain areas of the law, especially First Amendment, which is just a lot of important, debates going on in the states right now about religious freedom. People thinking, that religious freedom is under attack. And
well, if you are willing to impart that type of information and on the show, then I'd be more than willing to have you on.
I think that's like a whole other show in itself. But I'd love to come back
absolutely,
and,
not just
we can talk about First Amendment, religious freedom, and stuff like that. Yeah, I've got a lot of thoughts on that. So
no, I also need to know a lot more. I'm Canadian, and I don't know one hell of a lot about the United States.
Yeah, I confess my ignorance to Canadian law on the topic of freedom of religion and freedom of speech.
It's not an issue here, unfortunately. Well, fortunately, what I don't understand is how our parliamentary system works here in the US, in Australia, other places, where the secular way of looking at things is dominant.
Mm-hmm.
In Canadian politics, and I know I'm pretty sure in UK politics, religion doesn't. Nobody cares.
Right.
Religious or atheist or Jedi or whatever. When you get elected, it's political. Nobody cares.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in the United States, which doesn't have a parliamentary system, it has this constitution, which is a little bit murky. Well, at least it seems to be, because of the way people behave. It doesn't seem to be quite as effective as our parliamentary system. So,
well, there's certainly, you're right to say that it certainly matters a lot more to the American electorate that politicians have religious beliefs that they can identify with, at least to some extent.
Yeah.
Mitt Romney showed, I think, that Mormonism has become fairly mainstream. Now, there was some question about, could he appeal to conservative Christians? I don't think he didn't really suffer there. But I think that's because people came to see it as just another form of Christianity, and so like, he's okay with me then. But yeah, but here's the thing: that Pew study that just came out that said 23% of the American population has no affiliation anymore.
Yeah.
And yet, if you look at Congress, I think maybe one congressperson out of 535, that's 435 representatives and 100 senators, only one person identifies as unaffiliated. Every other person in Congress identifies either as Christian, Muslim, or Jewish.
Right, but are they doing that out of?
I think there might be one Buddhist or one Hindu.
Are they doing it out of?
Well, who knows? I think there's a lot of opportunistic.
Yeah. I mean, if they didn't, they wouldn't be there.
Well, also because we know that the percentage of the nuns is higher among people with postgraduate degrees, and almost all members of Congress have postgraduate degrees. Now, of course, most members of Congress are older, and we know that the percentage of nuns is lower among older people than it is among younger people. But so maybe that's a wash. But still, something like 23% of the total population has no religious affiliation. You'd think that would carry over, but it seems like there's still this just distrust of people who lack religious beliefs.
But this 23%, I question. I think it's at least double that. 23%.
I think that the number of people who are atheists or agnostic is almost certainly higher.
Yeah.
There was an interesting study done where they asked people about their church attendance. They asked them online, and they asked them over the phone, and they found that the people were less likely to say they attended church online than if they were talking over the phone. And there seems to be, like, when you make it more impersonal, maybe there's a fear of being judged or something that goes away when you can do it online. But yeah, I think that depending on how the survey is conducted, there's still maybe this lingering fear that if you identify as atheist, people are going to look askance at you.
Right.
That's something that needs to change. Because as I mentioned to you before, morality is something that we share with a number of other species, social species like ourselves. It's an ancient inborn disposition. It doesn't come from religion. And so the idea that you can't trust an atheist or whatever, that seems to be motivating a lot of voters to prefer religious candidates. That's just nonsense that needs to change.
Voters need to start thinking.
It's an invidious bias, like any other. If we said, I'm not going to vote for that guy because he's Jewish, people would say, well, you're a bigot. But if you say, I'm not going to vote for him because he's an atheist, people don't seem to mind. And that needs to change.
Of course. Yeah, no, absolutely. I know that you have to leave pretty soon. And I really want to thank you for spending the time and basically teaching me and everybody else, giving us a taste of what your philosophy is all about.
Thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed it.
I really love it.
Next time.
Yeah, you just let me know when you want to come back, and we'll schedule it.
Let me give you the link to the book on Amazon.
Yeah, give everything, and I'll throw it on the Facebook page. I want to thank everybody who was watching live for doing so. I thank everybody for the questions, even though we didn't get to some of them.
Here is what it looks like.
Oh, there you go. There's the book. I highly recommend it.
Oh, and remember, next week, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. That's the 20th, the 21st, and the 22nd. You can download it for free on your Kindle.
Okay, Wednesday.
Yeah.
Give me those dates again. Wednesday. I mean, May 20th,
21st and 22nd of May.
May 20th, 21st, and 22nd. You can download Dustin's book on Kindle. And where would they download from?
From Amazon.
From Amazon. Oh, is there a link? Amazon.com/
it should be available on, I mean, you might have Amazon.ca.
Yeah, so they could just search for Truth Evolves or your name, Dustin Arand.
Actually, it would help, just search Truth Evolves or search my name. Yeah.
And do you have a website or anything else that?
I have a Facebook page for. Here, I'll send you the link to that.
Okay, it's facebook.com/ I might as well just say it.
Well, it's got a.
Oh. Okay, that's the Amazon.com. Yeah, I'll paste that. And oh, great. So Truth Evolves is basically the name of your Facebook page.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, those will both be pasted on.
Well, because there's an organization called Truth Evolves, which is I'm not affiliated with. And then there's so if you type it into Facebook, it'll come up as organization. That's not the one you want. Then there's one that says book, and that's the one that you want.
Excellent. Dustin, I can't thank you enough for being here today. It was a pleasure meeting you because today is the first time I've ever met you. Congratulations on being such a smart guy. I mean, wow, it's not every day.
Thank you for having me. I was very pleased to come on, and I look forward to talking to you again sometime.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
You too.
Have a great summer.
Talk to you later.
Bye-bye. Okay, that was Dustin Arand. He has to run off and take care of his boys or his kids. I think they're boys, but I'm not sure, who are just waking up as they're young enough to have afternoon naps. Lucky them. To all of you, thank you very much for watching Reason Speak on Secular TV. My name is Sidney Winston. I'm also known as Ask an Atheist. I have a YouTube channel called Ask an Atheist and one called Sidney Winston. Check them out every now and again. I don't, at this point, upload too much. I do intend to, but I'll let you know when I do. Thank you again. Secular TV is the place to be. Stay secular, be happy, and goodbye.